introduce we have two speakers and a moderator. Maybe you would like to introduce yourself first? Okay, I will start first. So my name is Rob van Kranenburg. I've been working on what is called the Internet of Things for a long time. And at the moment I'm currently working at a German cybersecurity company called ashfin.io. Mainly busy with the broader implications of cyber security, cyber resilience, and these things that are now high on the agenda also of the European Commission, who's been coming out with a Data Act, a Cyber Security Act, a Cyber Resilience Act, all really putting cybersecurity high on the agenda. So that's me basically, and now I'll introduce my co-speaker.
Yeah. Hey, good morning. My name is George. I'm working in privacy engineering, and I'm fascinated to be here today because, I mean, when we were planning the session, it's super interesting to bring not just kind of the policy point of view, for example, when you have a directive or a regulation from data protection point of view, but really bring this into the next kind of thing, right? And I'm very pleased that we are going to have this conversation today. Yeah. Okay, let's get started.
So let me just briefly sketch some dependencies on where the metaverse is now today. And for that, I need to go back in time a little bit, because this Internet of Things, as we know it, was a term coined in 1999 by Kevin Ashton, who was a product manager with RFID, radio frequency identification. And for him, the term the Internet of Things was a logical term, and it also stuck. So now we are still talking about the Internet of Things 24 years later. And we will be talking about it for many more years to come. People were thinking every decade that this term will be replaced, but it's not, and it's still functioning. But it has a history. And history is basic automation coming from the 50s. So there's a lot of things that are not really new. If you hear people talking today about the cloud and the edge will be closer to the devices. These were the intranets of the 50s, and it's quite the same. In the 70s, we had IBM coming with a term called pervasive computing. And this pervasive computing had a large following during the 80s. And there's still some conferences talking about PERComp, talking about pervasive computing, but the term as such has not really stuck. Then another attempt was in the 90s by Xerox PARC with Mark Weiser, who coined the term ubiquitous computing, UbiComp. And he wrote a paper in 1991, The Computer for the 21st Century. And if you have some time, I think it's 10 pages, it's really well written, and it will give you tremendous insight in what the whole idea of this Internet of Things was in the first place. Mark Weiser was sitting in his room, and he was thinking, my computer doesn't recognize me, my chair doesn't recognize me, the objects in my house don't recognize me, my car doesn't recognize me, and he wanted to change all of that. So he wanted to put a little bit of computing that was in the computer into everyday objects. That was his start, to make everything smart. So we had a smart home, smart streets, smart neighborhood, smart society. That was his vision. And his vision was very much about interaction design. It was really about how to engage with that world. Because he said in 1991, I'm still dealing with the computer through a keyboard and a mouse, and that's still also what we do. And this mouse is from 1964 by Douglas Engelbart. So the mouse, if you Google for Douglas Engelbart mouse, you find a beautiful wooden mouse, the first mouse. But it's, which Mark Weiser thought a bit strange, that we still use this tool to engage with this digital world. And it's still around now. So it's from 64, we're in 22, and we're still using interaction tools of, let's say, 80 years ago. Then the ubiquitous computing was very much tied to Xerox PARC. Just in the same way, hello. How are you doing? Want to see you? I'm sorry for the delay. You okay? Yeah. Good, so we started. The next version after pervasive computing and ubiquitous computing was ambient intelligence from Philips, and that was around 2000. That vision also did not really stuck, and mainly because it was tied to companies. So ambient intelligence was tied to the Philips ecosystem, pervasive computing to the IBM ecosystem, and ubiquitous computing to the Xerox PARC ecosystem. And the term Internet of Things was this kind of neutral term, so that's why it's stuck. But in 2000, there was a Time magazine talking about the disappearing computer, the computer disappearing into the fabric of everyday life. Everything around us would become smart in a way in 2000. And it was talking about experimentations happening in Europe. So in 2000, Europe was far ahead of the US in terms of interaction design when it came to these smart environments. And what they did was, for example, projects like Lime, Living Memory, where they put a game table into a community, and that game table would have an RFID enabled connectivity. People would come and tell their stories. A story would be linked to a coin through radio frequency identification. People would put their coin on the table, and their story would emerge. It would show. So what was the basic idea and the goal of this entire community of intelligent information interfaces and a disappearing computer was to enhance the real situation with connectivity. And when we talk about the metaverse, we talk about the exact opposite of that. We're talking about a virtual world in which we want to draw analog or kinetic, as it's called, meaning movement and life embodiment, kinetic worlds. So this is the kind of the moment where we're at, and it's a fundamental divergence from the original idea of smart connectivity and smart societies. And it has certain repercussions, which we will be discussing today. Julie, you want to do your introduction?
Yes, of course. Thank you. I'm sorry for the delay. I was retained at the train station. So I am Nelson Junior, privacy manager at Exelon in France, and I'll be moderating. I was supposed to moderate this session. So I'm seeing that you've already started. So I'm actually working on a project, which is a thesis. I was trying to write, on the metaverse and its impact on privacy. So this very section is, to focus on the privacy threats that are brought out by the metaverse. And I think you have already started with where we came from, right? And now, when you, we came from a very far thing, and where are we off to now? Can we know where we are off to now?
I think for that question, you will start first. I think. Yeah.
So where we are now? That's a very tough question, right? Listening to the history of Internet of Things and bringing kind of that merging us as being part of that computer, from the privacy point of view, kind of the first questions that we're going to be facing is going to be data collection, right? Robert, you were mentioning, kind of having the signals on your movements and be part of that system. So when you think about data collection, the first question that we need to answer is, why are we collecting it, right? Now, you might think about like, oh, well, we are bringing the experience because now you are kind of interacting in this 3D internet scenario where your movements, objects, basically in this virtual reality, allows you to achieve or accomplish something, right? But the reality is that from the product perspective, that sounds like a very good idea, right? I mean, that's exactly what you are going to do. But behind the scenes, exactly what that means. Because the individual or the company, in this case Facebook or any provider collecting that data, is going to have a lot of information about you, and now the question is going to be, what's really the purpose? There is going to be, for example, things about your health condition, how you are moving, right? The way that you are talking. I don't know the number of sensors that you might have. Now, currently, the experience that you will have in the metaverse is a little bit awkward in certain way because you need to have certain equipment, you need to have certain glasses, and basically kind of an expensive toy, if you think about it. And it's very likely that you are not going to be holding this for the whole day, right? So maybe a couple of hours gaming, you can imagine, right? But that's the starting point. So we are in this moment where we are experiencing kind of all the sensors that we are kind of allow you to have that experience. But really the question is going to be, what it is going to be really, really the purpose once that the disclosure happens. Because, well, the company, once that it collects that, then, well, there is going to be some type of, knowledge about you. And that brings really kind of the most fundamental question. And the question is about accountability. When we're thinking about a privacy concern in any technology, we could go, of course, on the sensors. We can think about what you can do and the product, what it can do, and you can discuss this like for ages and ages. But really, the whole point that we need to resolve is going to be, well, who is accountable here? So if I will follow the definitions that we will have in data protection, you will have the controller. And the controller is the entity that determines the purpose and means of the processing. Basically, it's asking the question, why am I collecting this data and what is going to be the purpose? So in the case of Facebook, they are going to be the controllers, right? Which we know how Facebook operates. It's kind of an interesting one. But really, the full potential of the metaverse is not having one single controller by itself, right? What I want to make it clear here is if you think about an experience when you go to a service provider, the service provider being acting as the controller, well, you might authenticate, right? Username, multi-factor, how you want to do it. And in that moment, you are providing the data to that service provider, and that service provider is going to provide you the service, in that case, the metaverse, for example. But the power is not actually just the experience, right? It's not just that you are basically, kind of in that service, like having a game or something, right? The value and the power of the metaverse is that you can interact with other controllers, right? That means that you're in a virtual, for example, if I will put this in the metaverse, that would be that, for example, if you talk to PCB or another, let's say a customer here or a client, you will be able to interchange information, right? You will be able to buy things. You will be able to, for example, if you think about fashion, you will have that virtual construct where you will go there and basically, I don't know, try things on, for example, in that virtual thing, right? And now, in that type of interaction, Facebook is not the controller only, right? And that is one of the questions that is going to be very challenging, because if you want to make this comparison of being in this room, for example, and digitalize our experience in the metaverse, really the experience, if we will have that construct, is not just that you are in the room, right? Really the full potential is that you can buy something, you can read a book, you can watch a video, you can play, you can use exercise, right? And in order for you to basically enable that capabilities, you need to have other players. That means other controllers. So one of the problems here that we're going to see in the Facebook scenario is the role that Facebook will play as the platforms that enables another controllers to have that collection to fulfill another service. And from the privacy point of view, that is going to be very, very challenging, because when there is a regulator or kind of investigating, really the first question is going to be, who is the controller, right? And now you have a role that that is called joint controllership. That basically means that you have two quantities. And we already see one case, for example, being raised on Facebook. It's not the metaverse case, but it's the fashion ID case, where basically you have a retailer that is incorporating a plugin of Facebook, right, to promote kind of their services. And one of the questions that it was sent to the court was, is this company acting as an independent controller? And the court reached the conclusion that actually you are a joint controller, right? And you might say, well, what's the big deal on this? Well, when you are in a joint controllership, basically all the controllers share the liability. And you don't want to be in that scenario, right? You don't want to sell something, for example, have your metaverse shop, for example, and be liable because someone selling coffee in the entrance basically is doing something that is unlawful, right? So how we are going to define that relationships of accountability, what is going to be the joint controllership in this scenario is going to be very difficult. And it's not, it's not a compliance issue in the sense of you could have a terms of use, you could have kind of an agreements as the controllers living in this metaverse, but you need to think about from the data subject's perspective, the value that they are going to have by going to the metaverse. And the value, if I will just try to kind of have this idea, is that imagine you could, for example, have a job interview or, kind of go to a concert and you might have, pleasure on that. But really the value is that you are able to accomplish some task, right, in that virtual scenario. So if the system becomes extremely, with a lot of friction, right, that means that it's extremely not very user-friendly, right? The whole thing is not going to work, right? So just to give you an example. We have the construct of a controller. We are saying that the controller is having the determinations of purpose and means. And all of these roles needs to exist in this construct that we're going to talk about metaverse. Now, in that virtual reality where there is a massive collection, it's going to be very unlikely, that is kind of my guess here, that Facebook, for example, or the platform itself will just provide kind of the platform without having access to the data, right? That is going to be very unlikely that they are going to say, I'm just giving you the platform, go ahead and have this metaverse. They want to kind of have some value from the collection that they are having. But if you put yourself as a data subject, you need to accomplish a task, and the experience cannot be extremely cumbersome. And if we make the example, for example, of IoT, if you think about how you're going to be transparent, that is going to be very difficult, right? Because now when you go to that virtual scenario, think about your experience now with the horrible experience that, that we have with the cookie banner, right? You go to the website, is stopping you to access a service, and now you click yes, deny, see, again, privacy notice. Now imagine this when there are hundreds of controllers behind the scenes and you need to be informed and you need to take a choice of exactly what will happen with your data. This is absolutely a very difficult usability challenge that you cannot take away because you have an obligation of accountability and transparency, right? So I do believe just kind of the starting point of this conversation is that in that virtualization, when we are emerging here, really what I will see as a very challenging thing to resolve is going to be how we are going to formalize that accountabilities, who is going to be the controller. That is one part of that. The concerns about data usage, because of course all this data will disclose many things about you beyond what you expect to kind of do. For example, if you are moving in that virtual reality, you expect, kind of move around, but you don't know that, your movements could be, kind of profile you, know what type of things you like it, and kind of all these recommendations, AI systems behind the scenes. So you have kind of the ethical aspects on that, right? And the third element is going to be the transparency. How you are going to be informed, as the data subjects, getting into this virtual world, how you're going to make the choices. Because if we make the comparisons that we are having in the physical world, if not going to metaverse, is extremely painful, right? One of the things, for example, that I'm, all the time annoyed, well, I don't think that happens in this hotel, but for example, when you go to a hotel, when they give you this paper and say, just sign this paper, right? Just go ahead, and it's just kind of a bureaucracy. And that is not kind of the case. It's not a bureaucracy. It's to have the right to be informed and make choices. So if you see all the experiences that you are having of how you are being informed, there is not too much willingness to basically have a good experience in the information point of view. It's been seen as a blocker. It's been seen as, oh, just go ahead and click yes, right? Don't bother, just go, move on, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to read this. And it's not because you are lazy, right? It takes a lot of time. And there is research of people going into, okay, let's try to have a game here, and let's read all the privacy notices, and let's read everything that they are giving to me. And people can spend like 40 hours. I mean, you're never going to do that if you just want to play a game and you are 20 controllers on it. It just kills the whole experience, right? So we have a very tough challenge on transparency, on how we're going to inform our data subjects so they can make a choice. We have tough issues on data usage, like who is really going to be accountable, because no one's going to be accountable, right? It's just their problem, it's not my problem, so that is going to be a very challenging one, right? So that could be kind of my starting point. So, Rob, what do you think about those?
Well, I also think that accountability is the